moving the needle on founder failure, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Justin Gordon, and welcome to Startup 2.0 by Spark XYZ. Join us each week as we give you access to some of the top investors and entrepreneurs in the country to help you think through and overcome the top challenges that startups face. Today's guest is Ed Lee, who's the founder and CEO of HelloAdvisr, also a Forbes 40 under 40. And Ed is a pricing guru, something you may not have thought about too much. And in this episode, we do a deep dive into pricing and how you can think about it for your business. Ed, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you on. And there's lots to discuss about pricing, and we'll get to that in a second here. But first, just want to know a little bit about like how you started that company and like who you work with that.
So started HelloAdvisr about 2 years ago, and it really came out of the need from conversations with entrepreneurs, with investors about the challenge that companies and founders were having around pricing.
Yeah.
And so really focusing our working with the founders of startups and a handful of lifestyle companies, specifically around pricing and monetization.
Okay, awesome. And then with that, so what are you actually doing with these companies in terms of helping them? You say pricing, but then what are some of the things you're actually doing to help them out with the pricing?
No, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with companies, we're really thinking about a few different things. One is kind of getting into the heart of their value proposition. When they're going to market, pricing is really the monetary exchange in terms of what they're offering. And so we're helping them understand what their value proposition is and how they're going to start to take that to market. From there, we start to move into kind of designing what their pricing and monetization is going to start to look like. So everything that you see on the buy now pages of an e-commerce site, right, or from a consumer goods site and what have you, those are all designed. And so we're trying to figure out how can we best design that so that customers understand what it is that you're offering, but also kind of see what the value is from a monetary standpoint. And then we help with execution straight through. So really all stages of the product and the business.
Yeah. Are there any particular businesses you prefer to work with, or you kind of specialize in? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that?
We're pretty industry and vertical agnostic, but we really do work with a lot of B2B SaaS companies. Okay. We also work with a lot of e-commerce, retail, consumer goods companies. One of our recent clients have been in the gaming and the e-game space as well, esports space as well. So that's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. There's so many different fun companies.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out pricing with that. It's got to be fun. And then, and with the whole pricing strategy, like obviously we want to take a deeper dive into that.
Sure.
I guess let's start with like a high level view of what you kind of the process looks like, and then digging a little bit deeper into each step of that.
Yeah. So with every conversation, it always starts off with, Ed, what is the price? What is that number, that magic number? And the funny thing is, when you think about designing your pricing, that what you price, or the price level as we call it, is the last step. We start off with the pricing strategy, right? What is pricing supposed to help you and your company achieve? Is it market penetration? Are you trying to maximize on revenue and profit? Are you trying to change the mix? Just this morning, I was just talking to a very prominent LA e-commerce startup, and they're trying to change the mix from kind of transactional business to more subscription business. How do we use and leverage pricing to do that? So what is the strategy? And then we follow that with, then how do we design the monetization model, the pricing model? So effectively, should it be a subscription? Should there be 3 offers? Should there be 10? Should it be modular? There's so many different options, but the most important part of it is designing it for your business and your customers, not other businesses, not other startups' customers, but your customers. And that's really vital. That's really an important piece that's oftentimes missing in this discussion.
Yeah, and with that too, obviously it's tough to really give advice on such a broad thing because every business is different, right?
For sure.
But what are some maybe questions that these startups can ask themselves, or how they can figure out or back into like what their pricing might actually look like?
Right, and so, just for starters, what you want, if I was talking to a company for the first time, one of the things I'd ask them, and probably suggest that they do, is start to look at the competitive landscape. And what I mean by looking at the competitive landscape is not just look at what other companies like yours is pricing, but what other models are out there and what are the problems and the pain points that those models present, right? So when we think about the subscription model, and before we had the subscription model, it was very transactional. So it was really hard, and I couldn't remember that I wanted the extra detergent or the razor blades or whatever else. So the subscription model filled that pain point, and they created a monetization model around that. It became a competitive advantage. So understanding what the competitive landscape looks like, what's the pain point from a pricing and monetization standpoint that you can start to address. The other thing is also looking very introspectively. We tend to kind of look for external kind of data points, like what is other people charging and whatnot, and without asking ourselves the question of like, what is it that we really need to achieve? So recently talked to a crypto platform. It's a AI-driven data platform for cryptocurrency exchange. And there's so many different approaches that they can take. They could already find opportunities to exit by selling the company. They can look to scale the company. They can sell to B2B versus B2C. And these all require different pricing approaches. And it's hard to figure out what we should price if we don't know which direction we want to go. So it's those early conversations to have.
Yeah, and then with that too, obviously you're choosing a price and then the market knows about it. How do you iterate on that? How do you change it? Like, how do you approach that side of things?
No, that's a really good question. So, and it's an important point to make is that pricing is not a one-time activity.
Right.
And for a lot of companies, it really is. I'm launching a product. I need a price. I need to put it on. I got to put it on the price tag.
Yeah.
But it's very iterative. It's very, very much evolving. So the first step in that is just kind of understanding what's the process you're going to take. And it can be something as simple as we're going to have monthly or quarterly price review meetings. When we do our leadership meetings, it's going to be a topic that we're going to review. And these are the 4 things that we're going to be reviewing within that conversation. So that you have a pulse, not just on what other people are doing in reaction to your own price, but also understanding how the dynamics of your business has changed. Maybe you need to move more towards, you need to acquire more revenue growth. You need more profitability. Maybe you need to speed up the sales cycle, whatever that may be. That you are adapting to your own kind of circumstance as quickly as possible. The other part of it is in terms of making sure that you're constantly managing your pricing is the type of work that you're doing to understand how things like willingness to pay is changing and evolving within your customers and your new customers.
Right.
Maybe there's those that recently discovered your product or service and they love it or they hate it, and you need to figure out and understand what has changed and how that's going to fit into the way that you're going to market with your pricing.
Yeah, and I guess it's got to be so tough to do that. You're trying to get that feedback and you adjust it, but then it may not always be what you like.
Right.
And then another thing I'm wondering about is with the kind of like short-term versus long-term goals, how do they kind of weigh that versus the pricing and how does that fit into like their pricing strategy? Is it just like, what is now? And then you have to do that? Like, I'm just curious about that side of things,
So pricing is interesting because it's both short-term and long-term.
Yeah.
And so the best way I like to describe it is a series of consequences from your last decision. And so while the decision that you make will impact today, it's also cumulative in terms of all the other decisions and all the work you did or did not do in the past. So I look at it in a couple of different lenses, especially for startups and entrepreneurs, is that when we think long-term is relative.
Yes.
So looking at least 12 to 18 months into the future and saying, like, when we sit down again, what's going to change? How's your business going to have changed, right? What do you do better today or tomorrow than you do today? And starting to put yourself into that position so that you're looking and keeping an eye on that. And then on top of that, it's like, what are some of the short-term activities that you're working on? And, how do you, how are you able to push that forward and execute on that as well? I'll give you just one example.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges that some companies have is that while they would love to be creative and innovative for their pricing models, one of the challenges they have in actually implementing, executing, realizing the benefit of it, which would be revenue growth, new customers, and so on, is that the back end, they're just not prepared. right? While they would like all the bells and whistles in terms of pricing monetization, they just don't have the bandwidth to actually execute on it. So it's obviously balancing when we think about short-term, long-term, is also putting that into context, so that we're not losing sight of future opportunities, but capitalizing on the opportunities that are available today.
Yeah, and you mentioned not having the bandwidth to do it. Can you tackle a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so a case in point, so if you need to change something in your billing system, you need to change something in terms of the way that you present your pricing on your website. It requires an engineer, programmer, resources, correct. And so that is not, as any startup founder will readily know, is not always available. They they have a very long list of things that they're working on. And so while technically it is not difficult to do, it is one of 1,000 things that they're working on.
Yeah.
You can say the same thing about marketing and marketing campaigns. You can say that about if you're a B2B company and you have salespeople, inside sales, what do they do, right? How do you prioritize? How do you fit that in to make sure that you're capitalizing on the opportunities?
Yeah. And then we mentioned a little bit with the kind of like the pricing model of, obviously everyone wants subscriptions. Clearly like that's the desire of everyone. But like, what do you see within the pricing model in either different industries or with different companies at even different price points? Like just talking through some of those options that companies have and maybe that they don't necessarily always realize, or anything you've seen at all related to?
Yeah, I mean, people like subscription because it's easy. People understand it. They don't have to, ironically, speak to their customer to explain why this is so great. And so, but in terms of other types of models, I mean, one of the things to really demonstrate your value are usage-based models. So effectively, and I think companies like Slack, does a fantastic job of this, is that the more people that use it, not just people not the number of seats that you have in your company, but the number of people actually use it, your price goes up, or you pay more rather, right? And so, and then it's very clear. There, obviously, if I have 100 people or 1,000 people who enjoy the product and find value in the product, it's what I'm paying makes sense. So, but it is definitely a communication exercise, right? And there's plenty of examples where companies have really messed up in terms of how they committed, how they price, and the way that they want to, charge their customers. Netflix, for all the great things that they do from a pricing world, they are time and time again a case study back probably like 8 years ago in how not to communicate price changes, in their case, price increases. But, so usage-based is another great one. But what I always encourage every entrepreneur is your pricing model should be your competitive advantage. It's a way to kind of distinguish from not just your direct competitors, but just kind of your mark in the market to say, our customers are unique, our product is unique, and the way that we allow people to consume our product by paying for it is different.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's something that's oftentimes overlooked.
Yeah. And you mentioned briefly there, like communicating the actual changes to your customers.
Right.
So, I mean, what would be the ideal situation, or how should they actually communicate? Because people are going to say, like, watch this and be like, okay, well, what do you mean though? How should I communicate?
Right.
What do you think?
So, nowadays, I think companies have gotten pretty savvy in terms of how they do it. They readily explain for existing customers what's going to happen, what does it mean for their accounts, what are the options that are available to them, being empathetic. And that was one of the things that in the past that a lot of companies didn't do. It's this, my price has changed, take it or leave it. That doesn't work anymore. You have to be more empathetic and understanding of your customer's situation, even if it's for a $2 product. And so the way that you're communicating that, having the back end ready where, your customer service rep or, the FAQ on your website is ready to go to explain that. So again, it's that dialogue. That again, it's a difficult one, especially when it comes to pricing. Yeah.
It's like, obviously you have the pricing, the reasons why you're changing your pricing,
right?
And then you have to, being able to explain that to the customer in a way that they understand and like are not, I guess, irate with you about those changes.
Exactly.
How did you? So do you have a Netflix account? Just curious.
I do.
So how did you react to the changes once you've had?
It's doing what I do. It pains me because I would recommend something similar to my clients.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as on the receiving end of it, it kills me every
tough.
single. It's tough to take.
Yeah. No. That's totally.
Yeah.
How does pricing kind of play into a company's actually go-to-market strategy? If they're just trying to figure out product market fit. Like, how does that pricing play into that, or how should they think about that when they're go to market?
So pricing kind of fits into that intersection of sales and marketing, right? In that, if you're pricing right, then you should be pricing for your customers, which is a question that you should be, or it's a discussion you should be having with your marketing team as well as your sales team, in terms of what to kind of package it in and how to present it. Again, it's something that you would be having a conversation with your sales team. And so when we're thinking about kind of go-to-market and that intersection of that, we're kind of bringing all of that information together, and you're providing effectively a feedback loop to your sales and marketing as they go to market with the pricing and packaging that you start to kind of put together.
Yeah. And then it's maybe hard to answer, but how does a company know if they have the right pricing? I mean, how does that? How do you know about that?
So there's a few different schools of thought, and the one that a lot of people are comfortable with is when no one pushes back.
Ooh.
But the problem with that is oftentimes when there is no pushback, there's probably a good chance you're probably underpricing. Mm-hmm. So I like to say that when you have customers who are kicking and screaming but still pay, now you know that you've hit something, because now you've aligned that value exchange between what makes your product and service fantastic and why people will love it and will love it forever, and the price that they're paying, that it's still worth it to them.
Yeah.
So when you have that situation, as difficult as that may sound, then you found a real sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard so many different stories about pricing wrong and too low, or you get like the instant yes.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, why did I not charge more? Even like going back to I just used personal training at a company there. It was like, if I had a client, I raised my prices over time, and eventually I had a client that was like, oh yeah, for sure. And then just wrote me a check right away for a couple $1,000. And I was like, it probably would have paid $1,000 more. Yeah. But you gotta test it, I guess. But
no, testing is definitely one of it. There's definitely research that you can do before. Yeah. Like the example that that I give is that when I was at LG Electronics, we were also a vendor, or we were a buyer for other vendor services. And they'll pitch their prices and their packages and whatever else, but there's a big part of me and our team where they clearly didn't do the research. Like, they have no idea that while they think that they're offering or proposing 100%, they realize that they're not. They don't realize that they're only proposing 10% of what we're willing to actually spend, right? And so that's one part of that opportunity. That there's a clear misalignment between what people were willing to spend and what you were actually offering. And that's where that work in pricing really comes into play.
And now we'll take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, Brex. A big heartfelt thank you to Brex, who without their support, this show would not be possible. We've seen firsthand the difficulties accessing basic corporate credit without providing a security deposit or personal guarantee early on. As companies grow, managing expenses has become more difficult and time-consuming, which is why we've partnered with Brex to offer a corporate credit card that is not personally guaranteed, offers higher credit limits, provides auto reconciliation, and integrates with ERPs using receipt capture. Brex is the credit card of the startup ecosystem, and we highly encourage you to check them out. And back to the show. Yeah, and with that too, with testing or like trying different prices out, how do you manage that when you have different prices being suggested to different customers, and managing that having one customer see a price, but if they know it's a different price somewhere else, or how does that kind of play into pricing?
So if you're talking about price comparison, so again, while people think of that as a challenge, I like to see that as an opportunity, right? Because at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about startups and entrepreneurs, they do what they do because there's a problem in the market that they don't see being solved, and they think that they have a unique solution or a unique proposition to bring to to customers. Now, if you don't really believe that, then that's a whole different story. But I have yet to meet a founder that isn't passionate about bringing a unique solution to the market. So this is your opportunity to really showcase that, right? That if it's not just about is our price too high or too low, but that for this awesome solution, it's worth it.
Yeah.
And that is a different conversation to have. But it also requires a degree of confidence that you're pricing where you need to be pricing. And that's where we start to kind of go to the wayside where maybe there's a little bit more pushback. So maybe I'll give you a 10% discount, or maybe I'll give you a buy one, get one free type of thing.
Yeah.
And then that's where you start to kind of dilute some of that value.
Totally. Yeah. And with working with different companies, all these different founders, like what are some of those challenges they're having with pricing that you see come up repeatedly?
So the challenge with pricing that they have is, especially for founders that haven't worked on pricing in the past, is that they don't have a process in terms of how they're going to come up with a price and how they're going to start to design their pricing. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, they don't know kind of what kind of research that they need to do. They don't know kind of how to process that information to make better decisions. And that's what we're looking for. This whole idea of what's the right price versus the wrong price, we are looking, especially for founders, early founders or first time, entrepreneurs, you're really looking for direction, right? You can adjust the price points, but the price design is going to be something that's going to be a lot harder because that is going to fit in directly with what your customers value or don't value. So really, that's one of the challenges they often face is how do I make better decisions? And surprisingly, for a lot of founders, guessing is their pricing strategy. But it's definitely something that they can definitely work on and improve on and iterate on just going forward.
Yeah, so you suggest them having some type of process in place and then just evaluating at certain intervals of time, just or whatever, based on
there needs to be more rigor and more structure, right? I mean, when we, I say this always very jokingly, but when we think about companies, founders, and when they're starting their company, imagine how much time they spend on the logo, on the color, of their brand. Right. And don't get me wrong, it is important. It's part of your identity. But when it comes to what feeds your business model, the amount of rigor that kind of goes into making that decision, whatever that may be, it's something that we can definitely improve upon for sure.
I mean, it fuels every part of your business, potentially, right?
Potentially.
Exactly. Which is such an important decision that to have. Is there anything else then related to kind of pricing that you've seen, whether it be other challenges, whether it just be things that people should be thinking about with their business with pricing that we maybe haven't touched on just yet?
The biggest challenge is kind of fitting that into the leadership conversation. Right? It is, there's one aspect of it is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's a very functional component where I just need to get this done versus the fact that in a month's time, in a quarter's time, there might be a new competitor. Maybe one of my key competitors have changed their price, or maybe they've offered something different, or my customer base has changed, to which, one, I don't know that. Two, there's no way for me then to process it. And three, I can't make a decision off of that. And again, it's just having better information to make better decisions. And that is just a real big challenge that a lot of companies face.
And with that better information too, then is there anything specific or different things you're looking for, different touch points you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing. I mean, because I can't think of a single startup that isn't customer first or customer centric, but it's having that conversation about the monetary component to it. What is it worth? How has that changed? We've introduced these new features. Has that increased the value for you? How has that made your life better? Right? If it's a consumer product, do you do things better? Do you do things faster? If you're a business, is your teams more productive? How much more productive? Right? And it's those type of things that, that conversation that we're more likely than not having with our customers. Yeah.
So looking forward in terms of pricing and how this is going to go, like how do you see it changing, evolving, or in the next few years here?
So I won't dare to say that we're going to go towards profitability, but I think that especially when we're looking at some of the bigger names like the WeWorks, the Ubers that have gone public recently and the scrutiny that they've been under, one of the parts of it has been in terms of their business model and what the future looks like and that sustainability of that. And I think, one of the bright lights for, recent story around Lyft has been the fact that they've been able to leverage pricing to potentially have a pathway to profitability. And so I think that in the future, and I think increasingly so, there's going to be a bit more scrutiny and really upping the game in terms of saying, is this business model going to actually work? Of which pricing is a core component to that business model, right? And I think that is kind of that direction that we're going into. I think there's a more, I won't say pressure, but definitely raising the bar in terms of what does traction start to really look like? We know that we can go to market, do marketing to potentially acquire customers. Does that actually translate into a business? And I think that more and more investors, more and more founders are asking those questions. And I think those are really positive questions going forward.
Yeah. And then how does that, with that pricing too, then how does that change from the early stage? They don't have a lot of data. They don't have a feedback yet.
Right.
So as they move along in the process and they grow as a company, how does that change in terms of pricing?
You'd be surprised. Actually, we're going to be releasing a report in the near future where we did a survey with startup founders across all stages of growth, from pre-seed all the way to the growth stage and the expansion stage. And so they do improve. They definitely do mature. They get a lot smarter and savvier in terms of how they price. Far more structured. They have more people on the leadership team that get involved in the pricing. They are far more experimental as well. So they're more structured in terms of how they go to market or the work that they do before they go to market, but also after they go to market as well. But again, you don't have to be a Series E company to be able to do that. These are all things that even at the earliest of stages that a founder and two co-founders can be working on. Just as you would do when you're talking about testing your product with users, it is something that you can actively be doing in terms of your business model and your pricing as well.
Yeah, and then I know we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but looking at, is it a timeline of like it's been this long, let's keep checking pricing? Is it like how do we have this many customers reacting to it, or how do you, in the time frame of these startups, evaluate your pricing?
So, like I said, we talked about this earlier. It is definitely going to be iterative, and so it's going to definitely be situational as well. But again, your North Star then is your pricing strategy.
Yeah.
And so, and this is just general best practice for any kind of business strategy, is that you should be reevaluating and reassessing if the strategy is still relevant for you and your company. The same thing goes for your pricing strategy, which is why when you're thinking about and evaluating where you are, the dynamics that have changed, that's where you're kind of pointing to. And then that's where the rigor comes from. Like a pricing strategy, if done well, is really pressure tested, right? You need to be very rigorous as to why this strategy makes the most sense for your company and where you want it to go. And oftentimes we kind of, less work is actually done in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nowadays with your company, I'm just curious as to how you're spending your time day to day. What does your day look like, Ed?
What does my day look like? As a good consultant, every day is different. But no, again, I spend most of my time with our clients, and we're doing a whole range of projects and engagements with our clients. Right now, we're working with a global mobile gaming company right now, and we're looking at kind of their gaming economy and ways that we can improve upon that so that it makes sense in terms of how their players are being monetized. Also talking to a data platform where they are the go-to data supply for esports, for example. And so looking at their pricing and how they're planning to go to market. So it really goes across the board, from everything from pricing new products to evaluating their go-to-market to really kind of looking at where the opportunity lies in the prices that they already currently have. What can we do to improve upon that? How can we think about this a little bit smarter, just kind of going forward?
Yeah. And then obviously we've talked about everything related to other companies.
Sure.
So what about your company in terms of the pricing itself? How do you approach your own pricing and knowing all these things that you know, being like,
Sure.
now it's your company, it's your baby. How do you approach that?
No, it's the same principles apply.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why we started HelloAdvisr is that we found a need in the marketplace where, especially for startups, they need they get a lot of support in a lot of different areas, whether it be around product, around marketing, even around leadership coaching and so on. But when it comes to pricing, there was, far less support available for them. And so for us, it was all about access, which meant just making sure that we are able to support or at least share better practices with as many companies as possible, which means that our pricing and the way that we kind of go to market is far more flexible and fluid. And so again, there's not one set price. There is really dependent on the company's situation and what they are trying to achieve. And we work with them on that so that it fits them. But we never want to walk away thinking that they're no longer going to work on price just because they didn't work with us. So we definitely want to make sure we provide resources and support in order to make sure that pricing isn't lost just because they don't get to work with HelloAdvisr.
Yeah. And with that too, like, why did you get into pricing personally in the first place? Like, why? I mean, it's important, but like, I'm just like, why for you?
It's okay. My parents asked me the same question. Like,
Ed, what do you do?
How is this a profession? No. So again, it was always called something else. It was called growth.
Yeah.
It was called revenue optimization. It was called revenue enhancement. It was called everything else other than pricing.
Yeah.
But you can't really do a lot of these other growth techniques or mechanisms without understanding price. And one of the things that I discovered way back when, and again, this is really just through kind of all the different professional experiences I've had, is that you can't just guess in terms of what the pricing has to be. Whether it be, one of the things I did early on was working on M&A deals. I mean, which is effectively a pricing exercise, right? The whole due diligence process is for buyers to determine what they're willing to pay for that company.
Right.
And so it's a very, again, it's a painstaking process, but it's that kind of rigor that kind of goes into determining, whether it's $1 billion or $2 billion. And so it's kind of going back and understanding like there is so much more to it than that. And so just kind of through my experiences from big corporates to global consulting firms, just working with a range of companies that is such a important and vital driver for companies' growth and sustainability. And so, I just kind of really fell in love with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's
as much as you can.
Thing, right, with pricing. Fell in love with pricing. Like, that's great. With your company then, like, I'm also curious as to how those insights on pricing, working with different clients are shared within internally, like, and how you learn from that to like maybe suggest other things or evolve your process. How does that work?
Yeah, no, it's, every client is different for sure. But, the things that we share the most is really the dynamic within other companies. So the way that the CEO or the co-founders, how they interact with one another, how they delegate, how they prioritize, it's very much, kind of the psychology of leadership and team management. Because from, when we think about pricing, again, you can come up with the most innovative pricing model in the world, but if you can't communicate and execute that inside and out, realizing the opportunity and capturing the benefit is going to be very challenging. So understanding kind of how that kind of fits in and seeing that dynamic, and that's one of the big things that we like to share and learn from, and just kind of understand the different techniques that different founders take when it comes to prioritizing, the allocating resources and so on.
Yeah. And with your business too, like, where do you see it going? Where do you want this to go the next few years?
I want, my ambition and my hope is that when anyone decides to start a new company, whether it be a lifestyle company or a startup or a tech startup, that when they think about the kit of things that they need to do, is that they're very top of mind starting to think about that pricing question early on. Right.
Yeah.
And if we can help facilitate that and start to encourage more founders and more entrepreneurs to do that, I think there would be a lot more companies not struggling quite as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that. I literally had that conversation like yesterday with my co-founder with a different company of like, we were talking about pricing and we're trying to figure this out and like realizing like, in the early on stages, like you want to get customers, you want to get growth, you're trying to validate the idea, right?
Right.
So you're moving quickly on that, and which was kind of what we did on ours too. And then we get to the point where like this pricing doesn't make sense for the business itself moving forward. It's not going to logistically work.
Right.
And so we had to have that conversation, but it's just making me think of it more and more. And
but that's the interesting thing, because I think a lot of founders take that approach. Like, let's test, the product, let's test, talk to customers, acquisition customers. But I also challenge founders to ask the question, if those customers that say that they love your product or service and they're not willing to pay you $1 for it, is it aligned? Right? Right. What's, how does that change the dynamic in terms of how you're going to go forward? Right. Because that question never goes away, because eventually you're going to put a price tag on a website someday, right? It's an unavoidable thing. And no customer, whether you're a big enterprise customer or you're the consumer off the street, no one disassociates the product with the price.
Yeah.
And that entering that price into that equation, into the calculus of the customer, is unavoidable.
Yeah.
And so, but yet, when we think about going to market and building a business, we separate that as if it was mutually exclusive, and oftentimes it's not. Yeah. And so then we find out that we're not winning customers or converting customers. It's like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a challenge, obviously. That's why you're helping so many different companies with it. Clearly, there's a need for it. So, but with that too, then, so you mentioned it has to align with the strategy, and if they're trying to get penetration, so they're trying to maybe have a lower price strategy.
Sure.
Then, how does that expand? How does that change as they grow and they get more customers? But maybe the first customer base, they can't expand beyond that price. Like, how does that factor in?
The way that I like to explain it is, imagine a tree trunk, which has all the rings on it. And so at the very core are those loyalists, the ones that will stick by you, who even with all the bugs and all the issues with customer service, they're still gonna use your product and they're still gonna pay. That part is going to be the hard part. It's as you start to grow, it's understanding what those different customers look like, right? And what are the different facets and drivers for them as you start to grow. And when you start to think about your customers and the shifting of your business in that way, now you can start to be a little bit more structured and more methodical, right? Not try to create a one-size-fits-all solution, which is a solution for none. Is that understanding and starting to kind of migrate the way that you're going to market with your pricing for those different for the different customer segments.
Yeah, what a challenge it can be. Yeah. But, we talked about a lot of different things related to pricing. I think it's been obviously crazy helpful already. But is there anything else that you want to mention to startup founders, entrepreneurs, lifestyle business, whoever it is, about the pricing and what they should do with it? Yeah,
I mean, really, one, don't wait to work on pricing. It does take work, and the best companies in the world, the companies that we admire, from Apple to Warby Parker to Allbirds, they spend a lot of time working on pricing behind the scenes. We just don't see it. So don't underestimate how much time it's going to take. The second thing is really start to think about it in a more structured, methodical way. Just as you would do from a product development standpoint, the scientific approach, lean methodology, again, so on and so forth. But you really want to kind of get into that mindset of, how am I actually researching and testing my pricing? Do I have a repeatable process? Am I just using anecdotal information? Am I just guessing? or just trying to take a couple of comments or feedback that someone gave me and trying to make a decision that's going to impact my business going forward, right? And so just kind of starting to put that into place as you grow, more process and more structure. But early on, focus on, don't forget about pricing. Start to think about research and thinking about being more methodical and structured in terms of how you plan on going to market with your pricing.
Yeah, that's crazy useful. And Ed, where can people go to either connect with you or reach out to you, get in touch?
No, absolutely. You can visit our website at www.helloadvisor.com. You can also reach out to me directly at ed@helloadvisor.com. Happy to take any of your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for checking out Startup 2.0 from Spark XYZ. If you want to learn more about startups and investing, you can check us out and join the ecosystem at sparkxyz.io.